Greetings! I'm Karen Commins, a professional audiobook narrator in Atlanta, and I invite you to set sail into audiobooks with me. I recently left my stunning soundproof studio long enough to give a presentation at the Georgia Romance Writers Conference. I decided to share that presentation in this video. First, we'll explore the land of audiobooks and discuss reasons why every author should have their books in audio. Then we'll embark on our audiobook journey by talking about how to write with audiobooks in mind. Finally, I'll give you some tips for using acx.com, an important port of call to launch your audiobook project. Every journey starts with an idea, and toward that end, I've got a little story for you. After Quasimodo's death, the bishop of the Cathedral of Notre Dame sent word through the streets of Paris that a new bell ringer was needed. The bishop decided that he would conduct the interviews personally and went up into the belfry to begin the screening process. After observing several applicants demonstrate their skills, he decided to call it a day when a lone, armless man approached him and announced that he was there to apply for the bell ringer's job. The bishop was incredulous. "You have no arms." "No matter," said the man. "Observe." He then began striking the bells with his face, producing a beautiful melody on the carillon. The bishop listened in astonishment, convinced that he had finally found a suitable replacement for Quasimodo. Suddenly, rushing forward to strike a bell, the armless man tripped and plunged headlong out of the belfry window to his death in the street below. The stunned bishop rushed to his side. When he reached the street, a crowd had gathered around the fallen figure, drawn by the beautiful music they had heard only moments before. As they silently parted to let the bishop through, one of them asked, "Bishop, who was this man?" "I don't know his name," the bishop sadly replied, "but his face rings a bell." Basically, that's what it's like to listen to an audiobook. You listen as someone reads a story to you and plays all of the character roles without any music or sound effects in the background. Let's get started and explore the land of audiobooks. You've probably been hearing a lot about audiobooks in the news lately, and it's no wonder as the industry has been having significant growth. In June 2014, the Association of American Publishers reported that paperbacks are still the top seller, but audiobooks are growing dramatically. In October 2014, the Audio Publishers Association put out statistics showing that for the second year in a row, the industry has doubled the number of books produced in a year. It's a $1 billion a year industry. Several factors have contributed to that growth. You no longer need a special device. It used to be that audiobooks were something that only visually impaired or blind people had access to or even thought of using. You always had to have some clunky device to play them. Now, that's not true. If you've got a computer, if you've got a smartphone, if you've got a tablet, if you've got an e-reader, you can play audiobooks. In April 2014, I read that Apple has sold over 200 million iPads. Every one of those iPads can play an audiobook. And guess what? Apple, in its infinite wisdom with creating iTunes, has over 800 million iTunes customers, and most of them have a credit card on file. What does that mean to you? Anyone on iTunes can buy audiobooks and download them to their device and play. So there's this huge population out there that is now wired for sound. In fact, iTunes is one of the big sites where people would go to get their audiobooks. The Audio Publishers Association said consumers are now downloading 70% of their audiobooks. People used to think, well, they're on CD and you have to change the CDs in the car. So listening to an audiobook seemed like a bother. That thought is going the way of the dinosaur because people like the convenience and ease of a downloaded book. This picture probably looks like a typical afternoon commute in my home city of Atlanta. A lot of people love to listen to audiobooks while commuting. Some people previously thought, oh, I just listen to audiobooks on a trip. We're going on a road trip and we'll get a book. Now, people are discovering that listening to audiobooks is a fabulous thing to do when you're commuting. Here in Atlanta, our one-way commute is about 30 minutes. If you're commuting to a job every day, 5 days a week, 50 weeks a year, we'll let you have a vacation. That's over 250 hours in a year that people are listening to books. Plus, you read more than ever, so there's no downside. I found this ad from a couple of years ago. It was done for the 2012 Olympics, and you may remember it. It showed just how mainstream audiobooks are becoming in terms of entertainment.
Maybe just a short run today.
The Odyssey by Homer. Book 1. Tell me, O Muse, famous town of Troy. Book 3. Book 12. Poseidon. Book 17. Book 20. Thunderbolts. Book 24. The end.
All right, what's next?
Chapter 1. Call me Ishmael. Some years ago, never mind how long.
AT&T, the nation's largest 4G network. Rethink possible.
A lot of the people you see at the gym with their earbuds in their ears are not listening to music. They are listening to audiobooks. With AT&T, one of the biggest companies in the world, choosing to portray audiobooks on their ad, you can appreciate that audiobooks have arrived as mainstream entertainment. Listening to audiobooks is something you can do when you're multitasking. People listen when they are crafting, like scrapbooking or painting or knitting. Some people listen when they are cooking. I don't cook, so that wouldn't be me. In short, many activities are made even more enjoyable if you can continue to read while doing them. Being able to multitask is one big thing that people really love about audiobooks. Of course, I think every author should have their work in audiobooks. As an author, you may not realize some of the benefits that audiobooks bring to your work. Aside from what we've already talked about, with audiobooks becoming mainstream entertainment, your work is actually easier to discover if you have audiobooks. I've got some numbers that will bring this point clearly into focus for you. I pulled these numbers in December 2014. If you look in the Kindle store on Amazon, just the Kindle editions, not all known books on the planet, in the romance category on Kindle, there were 228,889 books. I'm sure there are many thousands more now. Guess what? If you go to audible.com, which is the main source where people buy audiobooks, in the romance category, there were only 11,608 titles. So you can see it's a tremendous disparity between the print and audio editions. It's so much easier to find authors in audiobooks. In fact, if you looked at the entire site of Audible, they only had 172,372 titles. The whole site of Audible, including all categories and genres of books, has fewer titles than just the romance category on Kindle. Your audience is there waiting. They are looking for you, and it's much easier to find you when you're in audio. Audiobooks put you as an author in a better light. Previously, only about 5% of all books were made into audiobooks. It used to be a really expensive process, so they kind of saved it for the top-tier authors or the really high-profile books. These were the only ones that made it into audiobooks. This wave of becoming mainstream entertainment is really just starting, so there's still kind of a perception that, oh, this author's in audio, so they must really be in the upper echelon. But of course, the biggest reason to get your work into audio, the one you'll like the best, is that it's another revenue stream. People who love to read and people who never read all by audiobooks. And the people who listen to audiobooks really listen. Book Riot reported in 2014 that each audiobook consumer, on average, listens to 17 books a year. Not only can you earn royalties from each sale of your audiobook, but the audio editions can actually boost sales of your Kindle ebooks through Whispersync. I don't know if you've seen Whispersync in action, but it's an amazing technology. It allows you to go between the audiobook and the Kindle book, back and forth, as much as you want. To demonstrate, let's look at this little video that I made. Starting on my iPad, I'll start reading a Kindle book. I call up the Kindle app, and the book I'm reading is Dixie Divas by Virginia Brown, one of my personal favorites. You see me flip some pages. I'm reading my book. It's a great book, and I continue to read. I'm reading. But my little dog always wants to go for a walk. Notice where I stopped in my Kindle book, Chapter 3. Yogi, my dog, is begging me, "Please, I want to go for a walk." I decide I'll listen to the book on our walk. I switch to my iPhone. I call up my Audible app on my phone. I've got the audiobook of Dixie Divas, and you see the message says, "You've just stopped on VO Launchpad," which is the name of my iPad. "Do you want to go to that location?" Yes. I adjust the volume on my phone. Chapter 3. "What are you doing Saturday?" Biddy asked, and I cradled the cordless phone between my ear and shoulder and kept stirring milk gravy in the iron skillet to keep it from lumping. "Same thing I did last Saturday, I imagine. Why?" I guess you could hear why it's one of my personal favorites. It's one I narrated. We're ready to embark on our journey of creating an audiobook. Let's talk for a few minutes about writing with audiobooks in mind. The first thing you need to do is listen. Listen to audiobooks. Author Jason Huff wrote an article explaining why authors should listen to audiobooks. He said that, unlike reading printed text, you can't really skim. You've trained yourself over the years to skip the boring bits, but you may not even realize you're doing it anymore, which can affect your writing. He said, "It's more than just the words. It's also the cadence, the pace. That's not to say these things are absent when reading printed text. It's just that when heard in audio form, there's a whole different dimension to it that helps you, the writer, understand and appreciate them. Over time, that extra knowledge will bleed into your own writing." He wrote, "I quickly learned how annoying it is when every line of dialogue has a 'he said, she said' after it. It's true these are often invisible in printed form, but a chain of them can really bog down rapid-fire dialogue." Laura Hillenbrand, New York Times best-selling author of Seabiscuit and Unbroken, has listened to hundreds of audiobooks. According to the New York Times Magazine, Hillenbrand believes her immersion in audiobooks has actually improved her writing. She said, "It has taught me a lot more about the importance of the rhythm of language. Good writing has a musical quality to it, a mathematical quality, a balance and a rhythm. You can feel that much better when it's read aloud." In addition to listening to audiobooks, of course, I suggest you listen to your genre. You'll hear how other authors present things. You'll hear how it sounds in audio. You may even hear a narrator you like and want to hire to narrate your book. If you don't remember anything else from this video, if you never want to do an audiobook, if you will do this one thing, 5 little words, I guarantee you your writing will improve. Read every word out loud. This point is so important that you'll be tested on it later. I hope you'll be ready to pass the test. Why is reading aloud so important? I saw a wonderful New York Times editorial called Some Thoughts on the Lost Art of Reading Aloud. They said one of the basic tests of comprehension is to ask someone to read aloud from a book. It reveals far more than whether the reader understands the words. Reading aloud reveals how far into the words and the pattern of the words the reader really sees. I found this part of the article to be so interesting, especially for romance writers. Reading aloud captures the physicality of words. To read with your lungs and diaphragm, with your tongue and lips, is very different than reading with your eyes alone. The language becomes a part of the body, which is why there is always a curious tenderness, almost an erotic quality, in those 18th and 19th century literary scenes where a book is being read aloud in mixed company. The words are not mere words. They are the breath and mind, perhaps even the soul, of the person who is reading. Wow! Also, when you're reading aloud, you'll hear yourself when you say the same word or phrase over and over. In fact, let's talk about some of these things. Every narrator I know would like 3 particular words stricken from the dictionary, and if you never use these words, we would be very happy. The first one is clasped. On its own, it looks fine. If you'll kindly indulge me, read the following sentence out loud with me. Walking in circles, hands clasped above her head, she gasped for breath. Clasped on its own is fine. It's always what comes after it that makes it hard to say. And there's another one, gasped. We hate gasped, too. Say this sentence out loud. Anne gasped as her breast pressed against his hard chest. If you think that's funny, say it in a British accent. In fact, we hate all words that end in ASPED, like grasped. I think you have grasped what I'm saying about clasped, gasped, and grasped. Yes, I'm having a little fun with you. But here are some serious ways to write with audiobooks in mind that will also improve your writing. One is to use shorter sentences. What you see on the screen is all one sentence. The fluffy dog, who liked to go on long walks so she could feel the wind blowing through her fur, play fetch with her owner, sniff the cool grass in the gentle breeze of the summer wind, while seeing what other dogs are up to while on their respective walks, and, of course, wait to relieve herself at the most inopportune moment in time, ran and jumped merrily around the house while wagging her tail to see how many things she could knock down to the floor as her owner asked her, "Do you want to go on a walk?" We actually see sentences like this all the time. If I were in the recording studio and missed a word, I would have to back up and say it again. I, as your narrator, therefore ask you to please use shorter sentences. Another way to write for audio is to limit the characters and accents, not only in the whole book, but particularly when they are in the same scene talking. When your book goes to audio, all 8 of these people will have a unique voice. We have to know each character's voice and easily be able to go back and forth between characters and dialogue. It can be confusing to your narrator to keep them straight, but even more importantly, too many voices can be confusing to your listeners. I even think that too many characters in a scene are confusing to your readers. If you think about the characters and their accents, you should also be aware that narrators are not versed in every accent on the planet. We may have a few that we specialize in performing. However, if you wanted me or any narrator to perform characters with Southern, French, Jamaican, Ukrainian, Bostonian, Chinese, Portuguese, and Scottish accents in the same book, let's just say that the end result might not be something that either of us are very happy with. When you're hearing yourself read out loud, even during those early drafts, you will hear repetitious words and phrases, and you can get rid of them. A narrator friend told me that she once voiced a trilogy and that the phrase, "she lifted her lashes," appeared so many times in the course of those 3 books that the narrator was afraid the heroine's eyelids were going to start growing muscles. You'll also hear yourself saying and oversaying the same words over and over, like in this lovely set of sentences. She walked through the door. He stood at the door looking after her. Then he turned around and turned the doorknob to go back inside. We have 3 occurrences of the word door and 2 of the word turn in a passage that doesn't really do much to advance the story. You'll hear grammatical errors that you didn't know you made, like subject-verb disagreements. You'll see those darn typos that you swore you fixed. Perhaps you changed a character's name, or didn't want a plot point to occur so soon in the text. As you are reading every word out loud, you cannot help but see and hear all of these things, giving you the chance to correct them and improve your writing. It's good to add emotions to your tags like, "She said in a voice that could cut glass," or "he replied gruffly." However, you want to watch these emotional tags, not only for your narrator, but for your readers and listeners. Including too many emotional tags is like being a backseat navigator. You can give too many directions. In audio, you need to trust the narrator to understand the subtext. If there are so many controls about how a line has to be said, the narrator may need to stop recording frequently to ensure that what was just said is not falsified by the attribution that comes next. It's good writing practice to limit the emotional attributions, even if you never want to create an audiobook. We've explored the land of audiobooks, and we embarked on our audiobook journey with some tips about writing better and gearing your writing for audiobooks. If you've ever been on a cruise, you know the cruise director always gives talks about what to expect in the next port of call. This part of the video is my talk about an important port of call, especially for indie authors. Before going any further, you need to verify that you have the audio rights to your book. If you're traditionally published, you may have, knowingly or unknowingly, signed away your audiobook rights. Check any contracts you've signed. If you find you have given your audiobook rights to a publisher, you can and should ask the publisher to either create the audiobook or revert the rights to you so that you can produce the audiobook. Remember the discussion in the first part of the video about the number of audiobooks on Audible.com? In 2011, Audible created ACX.com, the Audiobook Creation Exchange, because the voracious listeners on Audible would go through a genre and be out of books. Audible created ACX to connect rights holders, which can be you as the author, an agent, or a publisher, whoever controls the audiobook rights, to connect with people like me, narrators and producers. If you decide to go through ACX for your audiobook production, know that your book must be on Amazon first. In this introductory video, I can't show you everything you need to know about using ACX. However, I've curated a list of the most helpful articles and tutorials to help you get started on ACX. A link to that document is in the description of this video and will appear on the screen at the end. You'll probably want a professional narrator to perform your book. Many authors think, "Oh, I'm going to narrate my book." That's fine. But know that it will probably be an expensive process unless you have an appropriate recording setup in your house. When I say appropriate, I mean dead quiet. A lot of people have to record at 3 in the morning to achieve that level of quiet. You could also expect to spend lots of time researching microphones, learning how to use recording software, and editing the recording, which we'll talk about in a moment. Be aware that good narration techniques use different skills than writing, so additional time and practice is needed to acquire them. For these reasons, And, the most important, to stay focused on writing more books. Most authors prefer to work with an established narrator. I want to give you a few tips about the process on ACX. Some authors upload the whole book as the audition text. Narrators don't have time to read your whole book. We don't know what's important from that book. I suggest that you pick out about 2 to 4 pages, or about 750 words, which will equate to around 5 minutes of audio. In those few pages, include one part of narrative and one part of dialogue between 2 to 3 of the main characters. It's helpful if you can give character descriptions, because that will put us in the right playing field of realizing your vision for the book. You think, this sounds great! What's the catch? How much is it going to cost me? Before I can answer that, let me explain that audiobooks are charged based on a finished hour of audio. If we charged for the real-time hours that are required in audiobook production, no one would ever create an audiobook. On ACX, a finished hour is estimated at 9,300 words. If you have 93,000 words in your manuscript, your finished audiobook will run about 10 hours. To create one finished hour of audio, you can use this general rule of thumb on the time needed for production. 1 hour of prep. Prepping the book includes reading the book. The narrator must know the characters, the point of the book, and the story arc. Pronunciation research is also done during prep. By the way, if you have pronunciations that you very much want to be a certain way, tell your narrator up front. 2 hours recording. If I make a mistake, I have to go to the beginning of the sentence and start again. If there's a weird noise, stop. Go to the beginning of the sentence and start recording again. If I realize after I've read the sentence that I misunderstood the intention or subtext, like if it had a joke that I didn't get, stop, go to the beginning of the sentence, and start again. I may think of a different interpretation for a line. The recording process can include a lot of stops and restarts to get the flow and context just right. 3 hours editing, proofing, and mastering the recorded hour. In editing, we take out weird, gaspy breaths, mouth noises, inordinate pauses. The editor has to make sure the audio is paced well and sounds pleasing to the listener. The recording is proofed to be sure that all of the words on the printed page are in the audio, in the order they were written, and in the right character's voice, with the right inflection, without adding, subtracting, or transposing them. Sounds easy, right? Any mistakes that are discovered at this point are re-recorded and seamlessly inserted into the original recording. The mastering step makes the final product sound pleasing to the listener. As a result, it generally takes around 6 hours to create one finished hour of audio. Following that math, a 10-hour book could take 60 hours in real time to produce. I wanted to explain the time commitment needed for the production process because you have 2 main ways of paying for the production: pay now or pay later. In the pay now plan, you're paying per finished hour. For example, that 10-hour book that required 60 hours in real time to produce would cost some hourly rate you specify, times 10. Some authors do not have the funds to pay the narrator up front and instead prefer an option to pay later. For this reason, ACX offers a royalty share contract where the narrator gets no money up front and takes a deferred payment of a split of all royalties with the rights holder. Let me explain each option in a bit more detail. On the per finished hour option, you'll see several ranges of payments: $0 to $50, $50 to $100, $100 to $200, $200 to $400, and $400 and above. Again, these costs are not for the whole project, but per finished hour. Narrators with some experience will charge at least $100 per finished hour, and more experienced narrators are generally in the $200 to $400 per finished hour range. The union minimum is $225 per finished hour, just to give you a comparison. If you decide to pay $200 per finished hour for that 10-hour book, your total cost would be $2,000 up front before the audiobook can be made available for sale. For this reason, the royalty share option is very attractive to authors. Right now, the royalties are capped at 40%, which means that if you and a narrator agree to a royalty share contract, you get 20% of the royalties and the narrator gets 20% of the royalties. These payments are made for the life of the contract by Audible.com. Some authors balk at paying the narrator royalties for such a long term. I read comments like, "I'm the one who slaved to write the book. Why should the narrator get royalties for 7 years?" Just remember, without your narrator, you don't have an audiobook. And with all due respect, you're getting royalties every time you sell your ebook and print editions. Your narrator is not getting anything unless the audiobook sells. You really have to look at it as a collaborative process. Because of the tremendous risk that the audiobook will not sell enough copies over time to pay the cost of production, a lot of narrators do not want to do a royalty share book. We've invested our time and energy that could have been used on projects that paid up front, and we often have paid editors and proofers up front. With no guarantee of reimbursement, it's truly a gamble for a narrator to undertake a royalty share project. Two common hybrid approaches to payment options help to mitigate that risk. On some books of their choosing, ACX offers a $100 per finished hour stipend. Nobody knows the exact algorithm for determining the stipend availability, but all books posted on the site are reviewed for inclusion in the program. If ACX doesn't pay the stipend, you can always add a stipend yourself. You might offer a stipend amount that you will pay up front and then split the royalties with the narrator to help make up their fee. This option helps you afford a more experienced narrator and helps the narrator pay her team. If you choose to offer an author-funded stipend, you need to know that ACX doesn't have that option on their site. You would need to work out the deal and the payment logistics with the narrator to pay the upfront fee and click the ACX option for a royalty share contract. Before you make any offer on the site, let me encourage you to send a message to the narrator through the ACX message system. You need to learn the narrator's interest in and availability for your project, as well as work out payment details before making an offer. Now I want to give you a few tips for avoiding rough seas during the production process. On an ACX production, you have two deadlines. One is the first 15 minutes, and the other is the completed audiobook. The first 15 minutes sets the course for the whole audiobook. You need to communicate with your narrator before they start recording, especially if you have any pronunciation issues that you want the narrator to know. If you have your heart set on a character's name being pronounced a certain way, then you need to make that fact known before the narrator starts production. Audiobook narration is a performance art. Your narrator takes your words and breathes life into them. You have to trust your narrator with the performance, as Colin Firth explains.
I'm Colin Firth, and I'm reading The End of the Affair by Graham Greene for Audible.com. In the service of the source material, there has to come a point when you leave it behind and say, "I'm sorry, this is Mr. Greene, it's not yours anymore. Just for the moment, it's entirely mine. I've observed it, I've absorbed it, I've done as much as I can to digest it. And now I have to be Bendrix for a while." Why didn't you get angry, Henry? I never knew. You pimped with your ignorance. You pimped by never learning how to make love with her, so she had to look elsewhere. You pimped by giving opportunities. You pimped by being a bore and a fool, so now somebody who isn't a bore and a fool is playing about with her in Cedar Road. It's one of the things that the happiest memories of childhood was having chapter books read to me at the end of a day. When I sit down in front of the microphone, I'm free to dream. I think it's a wonderful art form.
Like I said, you have to trust your narrator, which frees you to do more writing. The second deadline is to approve the completed audiobook. When you get the completed audiobook, you're listening for technical errors like mispronunciations, missed words, transpositions that change the meaning of the sentence, a wrong character's voice used on a passage, or odd sounds. Some authors try to give performance directions to their narrators at that point, like, on this line, you need to stretch out the word no and put a little more menace in your voice. If you want to direct your narrator's performance, you're more than welcome to do it, but just know you will be doing it in real time as the recording takes place, and paying the narrator and possibly a studio for each hour. And you'll be sitting through every stop and start made in the process. Remember, too, that the finished audiobook is not a radio drama. It will just be the narrator's voice, or voices if you have more than one narrator. It has no music or sound effects, with the possible exception of music played during the credits. Most narrators on ACX don't add music to the credits, because that task is outside of their scope of work. I also want to point out that ACX only distributes to Amazon, Audible, and iTunes. Those are the 3 biggest platforms for audiobook purchases online. If you are willing to pay full production costs up front, you can sign a non-exclusive agreement with ACX, which allows you to distribute your audiobook elsewhere. On the exclusive distribution deals, your audiobook will only appear on those 3 sites. It won't be in your library. You wouldn't believe how many times my in-laws have asked me if they could get my audiobooks in their library. ACX audiobooks with exclusive agreements are not sold in bookstores. You won't go to Barnes & Noble and see your audiobook on the shelf. At the moment, ACX audiobooks are not included in Kindle Unlimited offerings. Whether you sign an exclusive or non-exclusive contract, you should know that ACX and Audible are your distributors. You are still your marketer. You may get a narrator like me who does actively market my audiobooks. Many narrators don't do any marketing. We're busy cranking out the next book. We also have more books to market than the typical author and can't spend a lot of time promoting a single title. It pains me to say it, but many listeners don't even know or care who narrates the book. They care about you as the author. You're the one with the influence. You're the one with the reach. Your fans need to be aware that you are producing audiobooks, so don't expect ACX or Audible to market them for you. I have one final little clip to share with you.
Oh my God! Thank you. The new phone book's here! The new phone book's here! Page 73, Johnson, Maven, R. I'm somebody now! Millions of people look at this book every day! This is the kind of spontaneous publicity, your name in print, that makes people! I'm in print! Things are going to start happening to me now.
Don't be like Naven Johnson. It's not enough to be in print. You also need to be in audio. Earlier, I said there was only one thing you needed to remember or do, even if you never want to create an audiobook. Do you remember what it was? Read every word out loud. If you need more help and info, Look for the author's resource list link on the screen and in the description for the video. You can also write to support at acx.com. They are very friendly people who are eager to help you. I am not affiliated with ACX. I am a narrator. I asked to speak to a live audience and then decided to create this video from that presentation just because I love audiobooks and I want to help authors navigate in this world. If there's something I can help you with, please feel free to shoot me an email. In the transcript of this video, you'll find some questions and answers from the live audience that are not included in the video. During this video, we set sail into audiobooks. We explored the land of audiobooks and discussed reasons why every author should have their books in audio. We embarked on our audiobook journey by talking about how to write with audiobooks in mind. Finally, I gave you some tips for using acx.com, an important port of call to launch your audiobook project. I'm professional narrator Karen Commins, and I hope you're living the life of your dreams.